Okie dokie. So, before we move on from Japan, we have to look at the long-term effects that the earthquake and tsunami had on the country. The first of those is the nuclear damage that happened. So, just to give you a bit of background here, what happened is that when the tsunami broke land and it invaded into the Fukushima power plant, it caused the cooling system to fail. Now, obviously, if the nuclear power plant isn't being cooled anymore, it's going to heat up and eventually explode, and that's basically what happened. So the tsunami resulted in explosions at 3 of the reactors at the nuclear power plant. If a nuclear power plant explodes, then you're going to have radiation leaking out of it, and nobody wants this. If you're familiar with what happened at Chernobyl, or if you watched, there was a brilliant program on, I can't remember where it was on, it's a 3-parter, I think it was just called Chernobyl, absolutely amazing. But no, you don't want radiation poisoning. It's an absolutely desperate way to die, it leads to a huge amount of sickness, and it's very difficult to get rid of from the land once it gets in there. Okay, so first problem, radiation leakage. Second problem is that nuclear energy supplies a good chunk of Japan's electricity. Up to a third of its electricity comes from these nuclear power plants. So with this nuclear power plant being knocked offline, there was the problem of lack of electricity, and this continued for a long time afterwards. And then there's what you do about the radiation. So radiation has escaped. How do you clean it up? It's a gas, you can't see it. You can measure it with something called a Geiger counter, but you just can't go around and sweep up radiation. And the problem is it gets into everything. It gets into the groundwater, it gets into the soil. You can't grow crops from the soil if there's radiation in it. You can't drink the water. It's gotten into the sea. And in fact, I read somewhere that as far away as Canada, there was fish caught that contained radiation from this Japanese explosion, and it contaminates everything around it. So it's absolutely desperate to deal with. And even now, 9 years on, we still don't know the full extent of the radiation leaks, and we still don't know the full extent of how these will affect the people who live there. And the video clips on this are really, really interesting. The people who go back to the area and they look at the possible effects, and there's still some people living there. You couldn't pay me to live in the area that was beside the nuclear power plant. It's had huge knock-on effects for the area. The fishing and tourist industry has been wiped out because people refuse to go there, and I don't blame them. People won't buy any produce from the area. They won't buy food that's been grown there because they don't trust it anymore. Okay, let's have a look. So here is the explosion as the first explosion at one of the reactors, and this was followed by 2 more. These are kids being checked for radiation. So this is a Geiger counter here, and this will tell you if there's radiation. And these are the evacuated areas. The areas immediately surrounding Fukushima power plant had to be evacuated. So you can see here around 300,000 people were ordered to leave their homes following the nuclear disaster. Former residents can visit their homes once a month with special permission, but are not allowed to stay overnight inside the exclusion zone. So the street lights automatically come on, but there's nobody there. It's really eerie. It's like a ghost town. It's kind of just been left exactly as it was. So if you live there once, you're allowed to go back once a month, maybe to get your personal belongings or whatever, but you're only allowed to stay there for a certain amount of time to make sure that you don't get radiation poisoning. Very quickly then, the town of Nami is in this exclusion zone where people aren't allowed to go. You can see that nature really, really quickly takes over. So this is a Buddhist monk wearing a Geiger counter. And basically the Geiger counter will tell you what your exposure is to radiation. So, I mean, humans can take a certain amount. Like every time you go in an airplane, you're exposed to a bit of radiation because of the sun. So we can take some, but not a huge amount. Now, see these plastic sacks here? These all contain soil and leaves from the area around. And a lot of the, like if you think of the leaves falling from the trees, they just build up. They can't be let decay and go back into the soil because they contain radiation, and they will just add more radiation back to the soil. 1 year later, they are still collecting sand that's got radiation in it, and they're removing the top layer there. And these are all bags of soil. That contain contaminated, all bags of soil that contain contaminated radiation. Sorry, in this image here, they're actually looking for bodies that hadn't been recovered after the tsunami, which is quite depressing. Here you can see contaminated soil. Now this is 2015, and these are just dump sites where soil has been put in black plastic bags and built up and up and up because they don't really know what to do with it. And it gets worse. These are all bags of contaminated soil. And in here, this is a local supermarket, and you can see that the spiders have just completely taken over. Now this is, I'm not going to play this because it's 3 minutes long, but this is in the file with the video clips, and you're going to watch this. Really, really fascinating stuff. And this one, again, this one is a really interesting documentary. I'll say documentary, it's 15 minutes long, and that's in the file, and you're going to watch that as well. And it's about people going back to Fukushima and how some people have just gotten on with their lives in the wake of this nuclear disaster. It's kind of scary. Okay, the second long-term effect then is the cost, the economic cost. So it was the 5th most powerful earthquake on Earth, but it has also been one of the most expensive disasters in human history. It left Japan over 200 billion in debt. Okay, and Japan is one of the world's most economically developed economies and would have money. So this was 2011, and there was already a global recession taking place, and economic growth had slowed down globally, and this then tipped Japan over the edge into a recession. Now, if you're familiar with Japanese brands, so these are all car manufacturers in Japan, and because of the extent of the damage from the tsunami, like factories were knocked out. Because of the number of deaths, there were no longer workers available. So global car manufacture was delayed by almost 9 months because the parts that are made in Japan couldn't be made anymore, and production had to stop for a while. Toyota recorded a loss of about 18.5%, a loss of profits as a result of this tsunami. Other big brands that you'd recognise, Canon, Sony, Nintendo, Panasonic, Nikon, Mitsubishi, etc. These had to down operations, okay? Again, for the reasons that I've talked about, supply chain was knocked off, but also there was a shortage of electricity because the nuclear power supply was gone as well. And for the first time in years and years, they had to actually import their own source of energy, okay? Because, like I said, they would get 1/3 of their energy from nuclear power. Nuclear power was gone. Recession was upon them, and they had to import oil. Now, oil is not cheap, so this also cost them more money when they didn't have it. All of these meant that Japan fell into a recession for the 3rd time in 5 years, and its economy took an absolute hammering. So the economic cost of this was absolutely massive. Now, next long-term effect. Anybody tell me what this is? I'm just picturing you in class coming up with amazing suggestions here, and I'm absolutely wowed by your answers. And I'm sure one of you has got it, but this is what is it? It's a cardiograph, okay? So, what is the point of this? Oh, heck, what's going on there? There was a huge amount of mental health issues after this tsunami hit. There was an increase in the number of heart problems that occurred, and that's why this here, because people were under an awful lot of stress and duress. And there was a huge increase in suicides. So the suicide rate increased by 5 times after the earthquake compared to beforehand. When you think about it, people had lost members of their family, people had lost their homes. It was a particular issue for people who had come from the areas that were affected by radiation, because these were discriminated against throughout the rest of the country. People kind of felt that they were contaminated and didn't want to associate with them. And all of this stress led to heart issues and psychological impacts such as suicide. And this isn't just anecdotal evidence. Studies have been done to prove that there have been long-term mental health effects for people in Japan. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get you to go to page 34 of your booklet, and very quickly I'm going to read through the article there with you, and then we'll just summarize what we've done. So go get your booklet, page 34, and it says high rates of PTSD and other mental health problems after Great East Japan earthquake. PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay, so after the incident, it's a psychological disorder that affects people. So the devastating 2011 earthquake, tsunami, and resulting nuclear disaster in Japan had a high mental health impact, with some effects persisting several years later, according to a comprehensive research review in that magazine. Although symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder related to the Great East Japan earthquake seem to have improved over time, there's evidence of persistent problems with depression, and this is reported in the study. Their findings highlight specific areas and groups of disaster victims who may have a special need for long-term mental health support. On March 11, 2011, a magnitude 9 earthquake occurred off the Pacific coast of northeastern Japan. A resulting tsunami damaged the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, leading to major nuclear disaster in addition to other local destruction. 4 years after this unprecedented triple disaster, more than 80,000 people are still living in temporary housing. To assess the mental health impact of the Great East Japan earthquake, Dr. Ando and colleagues identified and analysed 42 research papers reporting on the type, severity and prevalence of mental health problems in areas affected by the disaster. The analysis included information on trends in mental health problems over time and risk factors for developing such problems. In all studies that examined post-traumatic symptoms, the prevalence of PTSD was 10% or higher. Depression and child behaviour problems were also reported frequently, although estimates varied widely due to the use of differing measures and cut-off points. In studies investigating trends in mental health problems over time, post-traumatic stress symptoms tended to improve, or in any case not to get any worse. In contrast, depression symptoms tended to persist during follow-up. Risk factors for mental health included resettlement of daily lives, pre-existing illness and a small social network size. The reported prevalence of post-traumatic stress reactions was higher in the Fukushima prefecture, where the damaged nuclear power station was located. So basically, there was more mental health issues in and around the nuclear explosions. Suicides increased initially, followed by a decrease in the 2 years after the earthquake. However, the suicide rate remained higher than pre-disaster levels in Fukushima. Again, the area of Fukushima higher than average suicide levels. Natural disasters are known to increase the risk of mental health problems with the potential for long-term effects. Because of its magnitude and unique characteristics, the Great East Japan earthquake might have an even greater mental health impact than previous disasters. The results add to previous studies showing that a high prevalence just means occurrence, of PTSD and other mental health problems after this unique disaster. The prevalence and severity of mental health problems seem to be higher in Fukushima than in other prefectures. Prefectures are just the Japanese version of kind of counties, and some specific risk factors were reported for the region, Dr. Ando and colleagues conclude. The results suggest the need for long-term mental health support in Fukushima, perhaps especially targeting evacuees who are still living in temporary housing. Right, so the main takeaways from that is that there have been long-term mental health problems, such as depression, PTSD, and suicide, and that these have been higher in the area of Fukushima that was affected by the nuclear disaster. So to summarise that, nuclear damage is the first long-term effect, the economic cost of over 200 billion, and then the mental health issues that have occurred as a result. Okay, now you are now going to go and watch the videos, and you're going to fill this out, and I'm going to make a separate thing on how to do this. So there'll be videos O'Leary by the time we're done with this. Okay,